You're listening to the Ranch Stewards Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the stewardship and conservation of grasslands, diverse ecological landscapes, and the salt of the earth individuals who dedicate their lives to this endeavor. And now here's your host, Haylie Shipp.
Everybody knows that there are three things that we are just not supposed to bring up at dinner parties. Sammy Kershaw would say politics, religion, and her, but I'm going to say politics, religion, and finances. Well, today we are going to rip off the Band-Aid on at least one of those. In this final episode of Season 3 of the Ranchers Stewardship Podcast, Ty McDonald, a financial advisor with Down Home Financial, joins us for a conversation that hits close to home for a lot of ranch families. We're going to talk about how and when to pay your kids as legitimate employees on the ranch, when to actually start talking to them about whether or not they see ranching as their career path, what retirement planning looks like for ranch operations, and then making sure we take care of ourselves after spending a lifetime taking care of the land and livestock. Before we jump in, I just want to say thank you. This little monthly podcast has now surpassed 10,000 downloads across 65 countries, which honestly just blows my mind. I recorded the very first episode before heading into maternity leave, and fun fact, I was actually in labor when the second episode was supposed to be recorded. Thankfully, our guests did cut me some slack. As many of you know, ranch life shifts with the seasons. Right now, my family ranch needs more of me. My dad, who I've talked about on this podcast before, is recovering really well after stage 4 cancer. And this feels like a season where I need to be spending time learning from him while I still can, while also focusing on raising my toddler. That also means that I am officially stepping away from my full-time role as the communications director with the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, the role that gave me the chance to help to create this podcast. That is enough about me. What does that mean for you? Well, right now, the future of the Ranch Stewards Podcast, a little bit unknown. Depending upon who's hired, whether or not they want to take on the lift of a podcast, it may or may not mean me coming back in the future. All of that yet to be determined. For now, this is my farewell episode, and regardless of where the podcast goes in the future, I do want to express again my sincerest thank you for helping us to build this little corner of podcast world, bring agriculture and rural communities and the cohesiveness of conservation and working ranches together to help to showcase the positive story that really is happening out here on the land. All right, let's get out of the emotions. Let's talk finances with Ty McDonald.
Yeah, you bet. Raised on a ranch in central Montana, a little town called Geyser on the southeast side of the Highway Mountains. That's where I live currently with my family. 5th generation, the 6th generation is on the ground. So to be an operation that's over 115 years old, you have to do something right to get it to generations 5 and hopefully generation 6. You know, a little bit about why I got to where I am is, I saw a need for something in agriculture, somebody who could talk cows, somebody who could talk finance and bring it all into light and in terms we can all understand. And I've seen people do it right, and I've seen people do it wrong. And oftentimes when things are done wrong, it's not just money what's at stake, it's relationships is what is at stake. So I saw a need for that. And so currently I'm on the ranch, I'm operating that, but Down Home Financial, I'm a financial planner by trade. And so, a lot of what goes into that for me is starting from the bottom and working your way up, because you have to have the foundational level. And really what that starts with is cash flow and making sure you do have a profitable operation and an operation that if you want the kids to come back, that it can sustain that. And second is talking about risk management, and we can go into that a little bit more detail later. When I think about risk, I think about the risk of death, the risk of a disability, or the risk of a long-term healthcare event. Thirdly, we talk about retirement planning. I use that word very loosely in agriculture because I don't think we ever fully retire, but there needs to be a plan for income. Where is that income coming from? Fourth, we talk about tax planning. There's always income taxes, lots of angles there. And finally, it's estate planning. And most people want to start with estate planning, and that's at the very top of the pyramid. And the reason it's at the top is if you don't do all the other steps correctly, you don't have anything to pass on at the end of the day. And that's really what estate planning entails. So my practice is focused around basically those 5 different areas and helping people figure out a plan going forward.
So, Ty, as we look at this entire picture, and you haven't been in the business for too long. I mean, but you haven't gone through generations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But have you seen maybe a shift in how people feel about talking about this with an outsider, with a professional? Because this used to be kept very close to the vest.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's generational. It depends on the family as well. I've seen operations where mom and dad keep everything very tight to the chest. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And all the kids have their own idea in their head of what is going to happen. And when mom and dad pass, it doesn't go any of the way that the kids think it's going to go. And that's where a lot of this comes into play. And if I ask every mother, grandmother, and probably fathers and grandfathers as well, what do they want the most? They want their kids to still be able to have Thanksgiving dinner together when they're gone. And when I say relationships are at stake, that's what I mean from that standpoint. So, has there been a shift? I think there is. I mean, the younger generation is more willing to talk about it, I think, but that's not all cases. There's plenty of older generation folks or the senior generation, I'll call them, that are more than willing to talk about this and bring everybody to the table and have transparency to provide clarity for everybody. So when somebody does pass away or something that happens expectedly or unexpectedly, everybody knows what the game plan is. And I think that's really what separates the operations from doing a very good job and doing a poor job.
All right, so we're going to go through 5 areas today. We've got the stages of financial planning and why every rancher needs some clarity on that. From there, we're going to kind of take it down to the kids level, and we'll talk about how and what you pay kids and how you do that smartly so that they can actually invest that for their future. From there, how do you get into that conversation, and when do you start talking with your kids about whether or not they want a long-term place on the ranch? And then we're going to go into your retirement and then kind of that, as you said, kind of that risk management for long-term care planning as we talk today. And this is going to fill up so much content. I was telling Ty here before we started recording that this could literally be 5 or 6 podcasts, and we're just going to squish them all into one. So we might have to delve more into one of these topics later on. But let's just lay that framework, Ty, about what the stages are for financial planning and why this really does give clarity to the rancher.
Yeah, absolutely. And I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the foundational step is cash flow or profitability. And sometimes profitability is a dirty word in the industry, but my definition of a sustainable operation is profit. Because if you don't have profit, you're not going to be there in 5 years. You're not going to be there in 100 years. And so obviously a lot of things go into profit, a lot of different profit centers that a ranch can have from, if they're a cow-calf operation, you have the livestock side. They could have a hunting operation that provides additional income. There's a myriad of different ways income can be brought to a ranch, but it has to be able to provide enough income for all the stakeholders, all the people who are working on the ranch. If you go back 60 years ago, let's say, and you had a 500 cow-calf pair operation, that could sustain 2 or 3 families very comfortably. In today's day and age, until recently, because of this spike in cattle prices, you're probably 400 cows-ish to take care of one family, if that's the only source of income from livestock. So when I say profit and we are thinking about bringing the next generation on, it has to be able to sustain both generations. The cow has to be able to produce enough milk to bring in and provide for all the generations. And if it doesn't, we have to figure out if it can in different areas, or if Junior has to go get an off the farm or off the ranch job in addition to being on the ranch. I've seen that work quite well. So there's a lot of ways to go about it, but at the end of the day, you have to bring in more than what you spend. And if you can't do that consistently over a long period of time, that's going to spell trouble for your operation.
So, Ty, this has been something that I have been poking at. We've been doing a different podcast series that's teamed with Montana State University, talking about the ranch workforce and bringing on employees and what good employees not expect isn't even the right word, like what their value actually is, and how as ranchers, we've often really undervalued those ranch managers, those ranch hands. And we've been talking through some of the wages, and it's something like, $2,500 to $4,800 a month that you're paying those individuals. And one of the last podcasts, it just took me aback because I'm now on the ranch full time and I don't pay myself those wages. But we are looking at this situation right now with an elevated cattle market where we can make things cash flow and, have a fairly high expense sheet. But I know we're all waiting for the other shoe to drop. You don't want to overhire. You don't want to overstaff. You don't want to just start throwing it out there because we're just so worried that something's going to go the other way. What advice do you give producers that you talk to in this situation?
Well, there's a good acronym out there called KISS, and it stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. And sometimes we make things a lot more complicated than what it needs to be. I will also say that in any business, particularly in agriculture, your human capital or your employees, whether that's yourself or whether you have hired help, is the most valuable part of your operation. Because if it's not, how's the job going to get done? We're not all robots out there. I mean, technology is expanding, and we can talk a whole nother podcast on some of the different technology that some of the ranchers and farmers have at their disposal today. But human capital is a big thing, and I will tell you, there's plenty of employees that they don't need to be paid a super high wage, but having flexibility with their schedule, housing is a big one. Um, uh, Flexibility to, if they need time off, be able to do that. Sometimes in agriculture, we're used to working 8 days a week, right? And we expect that of everybody else. Well, if it's your baby, if it's your operation, sure. But if you're hiring somebody and it's not their baby, everybody needs time off, including the ones that are doing it, the owners of the operation. So I think finding good help is extremely difficult, and that's for any business today. But the least expensive option is to maintain that help. And you can do that with a myriad of different ways: retirement plans, housing, a whole bunch of other things we can talk about. But, I think that human capital component, without it, we're not getting those calves to market.
You want healthy pastures, healthy cattle, and healthy bottom lines. But high fencing and labor costs, lack of time, and rugged, isolated pastures stand in your way. That's where Vence comes in. Our simple plan: collar your cattle, set endless virtual fences anytime, anywhere, and watch your herd rotate pastures effortlessly. Visit VenceFence.com today to get started. Vence, grazing reimagined.
Today we're going to talk about kids. And so you've got young children, I've got a toddler. And I was reading through one of your latest blog posts, which folks can find at downhomefs.com. And it's, should I put my children on the farm or ranch payroll? And I thought, well, they can't work until they're 15 or 16, right, by the state law. And then I got to reading this thing and I'm like, heck, I could start paying him as soon as he's actually able to put in time for work, right? So talk to me about how this works. How do we pay our kids on the ranch and do so in a legal fashion?
Yeah, well, I think number one, we got to confirm with your CPA, because we got to make sure they're on board just from an IRS standpoint with what we're doing. They'll explain to you that the work has got to be legitimate. It can't just be phantom work to be able to do it. But I think, with a lot of small business, not just agriculture, there are kids of the owners who are doing a lot of this work anyhow on a daily basis, whether it's feeding the steers or the heifers for butcher beef, or going out and helping dad or mom move equipment on the place. It could be spraying weeds. It could be just getting in the tractor, feeding cattle every single day. I mean, I go back to when I was young, and I think the first time I drove was on a shift on the column, old Ford tractor pulling a twin rake and I must have been 7 years old, I think. I was doing the work, and it was an open field, thank God, because Dad didn't have me next to a fence because I might have ran into it and wrecked the fence. And I have done that before when I was little. But you get used to putting your kids in those situations. Why couldn't they get paid? I mean, it's no different than having an employee. So, but I tell a lot of folks, one of the high level topics you can do is pay your kids, and you can give them a head start on investing for their future. A lot of times, just from a tax standpoint, you could put it into a Roth IRA, and that's another discussion. But it's an investment vehicle essentially to allow them to get a head start on building wealth for their future, so they have more options and more flexibility down the road. And the biggest thing with all this is got to be reasonable. They got to be able to do the work. I did it with my daughter this last year, and she was legitimately doing work for me on the operation. And I mean, you're gonna pay somebody to do it. And so I think it's just a very strategic way to do that, reduce the tax load on the operation, but also be able to allow the kid to put dollars into an appreciating asset that will help them a little bit further down the road.
And this also keeps more of your money within, your family, right? Because you're reducing your taxable income on the ranch, you're spending on a legitimate employee, but then that child doesn't get taxed a whole lot when they're making $2,000 or $3,000 a year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, again, you got to confer with your CPA on the rules and regulations when it comes to taxes. A child making $2,000 or $3,000 a year because of the single filing deduction, which is $15,000 and change right now. If they're making 2,000 or 3,000, there's going to be no taxable income for them from an income tax level, at least at the state or at the federal level. So I think you can be pretty strategic with keeping more dollars in your operation, like you're saying, Haylie, but also be able to help your kids have a head start, maybe a better head start than you have, so they have some more options, some more flexibility down the road. And we can talk a little bit more later on why that's important to have investments that have nothing to do with the farm or the ranch.
Give me an example, just a hypothetical of what investing $2,000 into an IRA when you are 8 years old can look like when you're 66 years old and going to retire. That is a wild concept, I think, for most folks in agriculture. We generally haven't had great retirement accounts to start out with. So to think about a retirement account that can age for almost 60 years is wild.
Yeah, well, and I think when you start talking about investing, there's a myriad of things you can do to invest. And a lot of us have continued to invest in the thing we know, which is livestock or land or machinery, equipment, things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the really good operations that I advise and that I know of understand that it's smart to diversify. It's smart to have assets outside of agriculture to make the transition to the next generation easier, quite frankly. There are many operations where they are dependent on some sort of lease, whether it's a lease of machinery, operating assets, cattle, or a lease of land. And sometimes the senior generation needs $60,000 a year, but junior can only afford $40,000 a year. Well, if you had a bridge, if you had something else, maybe it's an IRA account, maybe it's just some other non-retirement account investment, it helps bridge that gap and provide more flexibility. So to your previous question, Haylie, on what that can do, I'll just frame it in a different standpoint. Take a 20-year-old, so they just been in college for a year or two. Let's say they start putting $100 a month away for 10 years. So $100 a month from age 20 to age 30, and then they stop. Now take a different person. They don't start doing that until they're 30. So they start putting $100 away at the time they start the age of 30, and they do it until they're 65. So that 30-year-old did it for way longer than that 20-year-old did. But when they both hit 65, who's going to have more money? It's going to be the 20-year-old. Well, why is that? The 30-year-old put way more in, but the 20-year-old started way earlier. I'm blanking on his name, but the eighth wonder of the world has been termed compound interest. And the value of time is always on your side. And when we start talking about just general investing in companies, which is my cup of tea, that's what compound interest can do. Now, you're investing in your company right away, your ranch, right? Well, there's a lot of other businesses out there that are very good companies that can provide a rate of return, and they have nothing to do with agriculture, which just helps the diversity standpoint. So I think starting small, and particularly if you start paying your kids when they're 6, 7, 8 years old, and it doesn't have to be a lot. Wow, by the time they're 60 or 70 years old, that could turn into a small fortune.
Probably can't pay him for being my emotional support toddler just yet, but we'll wait till he can actually get the gates. So, okay.
For sure.
I've got to move this conversation along, and I could stick here for a long time. So we've identified that we can start paying our children young. Of course, make sure it's all okay with the CPA. Tax rules are always changing. Make sure you're on the up and up there, because if you're on the wrong side of payroll, it's better to be on the right side of that figure. So next up, we've got these kids that are working. Hopefully they're enjoying it. When do we start talking to them and start sort of finessing that discussion about whether or not they might want to take over the ranch?
Yeah, well, I think every operation that's generational would love their son or daughter to be the one to come back and take it over. That's not always in the cards. So how do you broach that subject? I mean, pay attention, observe, put them in situations that that you think they can handle to be able to do it. And I would just, have conversations about it, especially at a young age. Put them on the rake tractor, help them sort cows with you, or whatever it may be. I mean, do they have a passion for it? And you'll see that when they're young. By the time they hit high school, they're thinking about potentially college or maybe a trade school or just working for somebody else after high school. And I mean, I think I would at that point start having more serious discussions with, hey, do you think that you know the ranch could be your future? And I don't think there's any wrong way to go about it, Haylie. I think it's just having open communication and letting them know what you're thinking. Um, Having a no pressure situation with them, to say, hey, if you want to come back, that'd be great. But if you don't, that's okay too. Because I think when I think about my kids, I want them to have the best opportunity they can to do what they want. And if that means the ranch, if that means taking over my financial planning practice, great. But if that's not in the cards for them, I think that's okay as well. So I think a lot of that is just having age appropriate discussions with them. And those discussions are going to continue to grow the older they get. And then the other thing I would encourage is if they do want to come back to the operation, I would say you, as a stipulation of employment, make them go work for somebody else, whether it's after high school or whether it's after college, because I think the experiences I've had before I returned to the ranch have only helped me because it provides a different perspective on how things are done. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat out there, and not every ranch is going to do the same thing, and that's what makes us so unique in agriculture. But I think gaining perspective and figuring out what can work, what cannot work, and helping that child develop critical thinking skills, because you're going to have to think on the fly. I don't care what business it is. I think that's really what we're trying to do with our youth, is help them develop those critical thinking skills. So in summary, that's a long-winded answer, but in summary, have those discussions early and often, age appropriate. Get a feel for what they're thinking. If it's a passion for them, put them in opportunities. Make Let's say you're a coach on a ball team, football team, basketball team, volleyball team, doesn't matter. Put them in positions for success. You'll figure that out as they go through and see if they can handle it. And just use your best judgment from that standpoint.
This came from Jolene Brown, who is a phenomenal speaker on succession planning. And yes, Ty, you came to one of our workshops with Jolene and helped to serve on a panel. But one of the things that they had set up on their farm, and it's either Ohio or Iowa, I'm pretty confident it's Iowa. And she had said that for their farm in Iowa, none of the second generation or none of her children's generation wanted to farm. and they were supportive and A-okay with that as parents. But they weren't quite ready to hang the hat and sell the operation just yet. They had it listed as part of their estate plan, which she better have a buttoned up estate plan if this is what this lady makes her living talking about. But she said that uh, they made it so that the generation of her grandchildren, I think it was like 23 years old once the frontal lobe has developed, then as long as no grandchild wanted to have the farm by the time the youngest one turned 23, then they could look at selling it to a neighbor or to somebody that they trusted. And I just thought that that was so neat because we talk about mental health in agriculture so much, and there is so much pressure built in to what you feel like you're supposed to do, or you're letting down your family. And if you don't want to be a farmer or a rancher, don't be. Life is too short. But I think that that was such an incredible way to lift that pressure. By the time that grandchild is 23 years old, they're probably not going to feel so bad about letting grandma or grandpa down if they're even still with us. And so it doesn't have to turn into this huge family battle. And I just thought that that was tremendously important. Um, I love that you said too that, it's just kind of critical thinking, and where can they go to get critical thinking skills and to learn those to put them into place on the ranch. Folks that are listening have probably already put this together, but I have been on our ranch now for about 20 months as the primary decision maker. And it was because of a family medical issue and stage 4 cancer that just thrust me into that seat. And I did not realize, I guess I knew, but how much every day was just problem solving. That's all I do all day long is just problem solve. And thank goodness for YouTube. I don't know how people ranched before YouTube because, I have figured out how to reprime fuel tanks, how to fix the 3-point, how to do all these things. I'm not a mechanic, but the mechanics are too far away for me to call, and I feel like I should be able to do it. So yeah, critical thinking and problem solving.
Absolutely.
Okay, up next, we've talked about paying our kids. We've talked about how to discuss with them whether or not they're ready to take over the ranch. Now, let's go into saying that they are. You do have a child that wants to step up and be the next generation. How do we make sure that we are not just giving this place away? Because that happens too often, and we see retired farmers and ranchers really living at poverty level because they struggled so much. They don't want to hand over an operation to their children that's going to result in them struggling. And so they just tend to be so humble, and they just tend to give a lot. So what are some strategies to set yourself up for retirement in a manner that doesn't strip the cash flow from the farm or ranch?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you're really talking about the bread and butter of what I do on a daily basis with my financial planning, because a lot of us have ran as either sole proprietors or ran very closely with the operation. And a lot of us have no idea what our personal living expenses actually are because it runs all through the operation every single year, every single month. So a lot of it really depends on, the senior generation has given their whole life to working that. They deserve to be comfortable. They deserve to not have to worry about, going to buy a steak or going out for a concert or something like that. But on the other hand, it's got to work for the junior generation as well, to where it's not so tight that their lease payment or whatever arrangement is done with the senior generation puts them in a tough spot, especially if they have kids and a growing family. So I guess kind of the first step with all that, Haylie, is figuring out what do you need between your insurance, between income taxes you're going to have to owe, if you have any personal debt, and then just regular living expenses like groceries and utilities and things like that. Most ranches are always going to pay for utilities and some of your ancillary things, but I think there needs to be a clear expectation of what the senior generation needs and what the junior generation needs and how we can make that work. Now, how do we bridge some of that gap? If you work for a lot of other businesses out there, besides agriculture, they have some sort of employer-sponsored retirement plan where you can put some of your own dollars into an investment. It's a retirement plan, and the company matches a certain portion of that. Well, I think agriculture can do the same thing. It's just a different way of thinking. We're paying our employees, we're paying us as owners to be able to do that. But if we're able to do that and pay for retirement a little bit at a time throughout the course of a 30-year career or a 40-year career, now it completely lessens the load that the ranch has to bear on what that lease payment might be to junior or so on and so forth. So that's a lot of what I focus on is preventative maintenance so we can get there. If none of that has been done, then we really have to look at the numbers and say, all right, if the senior generation needs 60,000 and junior can only afford 40,000, what do you have to do, junior, in addition to the ranch to be able to make up for that? And if you can't do that, then there needs to be a serious conversation on, is this going to be a sustainable operation going forward? And those are tough conversations. Nobody wants to have those conversations, but it's better to know now than to get into a deal and be 30 years down the road and lose it all because of some event that wasn't thought about.
I think about this so often because the old adage is always behind every successful rancher is a wife that works in town. Of course, the feminist in me is just, ugh. I hate that saying. But, I think there's two things that I see often in ranching. And one of those is that, if times are tough, ranchers are going to dig in and they're going to work harder in the ranch. But it almost is like they're too proud to throw on a Harvest State shirt and work part-time in town because the public might perceive that they failed. But they also could, rather than throwing in 16-hour days at home, they might be able to make it work to do a 6-hour day on the ranch and go in and work a part-time shift once in a while too. But there's almost this pride that gets in the way. So that plus the element of now remote work. Both you and I are working from our homes right now and making good wages doing it around what we have to do on the ranch, which that opportunity was never available before. So do you think people are starting to look at that more and embracing the fact that they might have to dig deeper into a payroll bucket versus just self-funding?
Yeah, I think it's definitely what I see. It's definitely more with the younger generation, just because we grew up with technology. We grew up with dial-up internet. We were used to using computers from day one, essentially, and even more so with this current generation right now. But I just go back to an old saying that Dave Ramsey has had, and Dave Ramsey is a well-known talking head and has done a great job for a lot of families throughout the country. But if your expenses are too much, you basically have two choices. You can earn more or you can reduce your expenses. Well, sometimes in agriculture, it's pretty tough to cut costs, right? Because it is what it is. Especially you look at the last 6 years with inflation, what things have done. If you look at an oil filter or a bearing on a swather or a combine or something like that. I mean, these or a service call, for goodness sakes, to fix a flat tire on the tractor. I mean, these are not cheap or expenses, right? So you got to be able to think outside the box. And I think the old adage is, well, I ranch, I farm, that's all I do. And it's the coffee shop talk in town. And I don't want people talking about me. And if I'm working part-time, then people are going to think that, my gosh, they must be down on their luck or not doing very well and so on and so forth. Quite frankly, what somebody else thinks about you is none of your business. That's what I tell everybody. And we are so unique from a financial standpoint. We are so unique just from an operational standpoint in agriculture. And we are so fiercely independent sometimes that we think we can do it all by ourselves. Well, sometimes you got to go to, maybe it's the Napa auto parts store in town or something like that and say, hey, can I pick up a couple shifts a week, or do what you can do? Or I know guys that are on the video auction, whether it's Northern, Superior, Western, and they're repping calves on the side. But there are tons of ways to make this work. We just got to be willing to think outside the box and willing to have more than one job, if you will, to make it work. And with the advent of remote technology, my wife is an RN, and there's tons of opportunity out there for her just from a work from home RN position. I mean, we're 55 miles from town where she could have an RN job, but that might be the better play for us as we go down the roads. Are more people thinking about it? I think they are, but they got to be willing to not be concerned about what the community thinks about that.
And we've also held events where we looked at different ranches and their different succession plans that they had, how they were managing their estate planning. And Ranchers Stewardship Alliance had one probably in 2023 that featured 4 different ranch families that were all going through something totally different. And so everybody, like you said, everybody's got a different financial picture. They were all approaching their estate plan different. But one common thread for a lot of them, and these were ranches that were rather large and had multiple people trying to come back to them. And the Mannixes are a great example of added enterprises. And of course, you can look up what's happening with the Old Salt Festival coming up real soon here in June in Montana. And that's just one of the added enterprise opportunities within that operation. But, it might not look like a job in town, but if you can sit down with a business plan and show that something's going to cash flow and be complementary to what we're doing, it really is a win-win.
Absolutely. And there's tons of ways. I mean, I alluded to that before. People have hunting enterprises. People have rock quarries. I mean, you look at, there's an app out there. It's kind of the Airbnb of hunting. I mean, people are going to come pay money to take a walk on your land or gaze at the stars or bird watch. And I mean, people just don't have that connection to the land like they used to, but they're willing to pay for it to get out of the city and get out in nature. So we just got to be willing to do something we haven't done before. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if we want something different, we got to be willing to do something different.
Montana. We are proud to say it's where we live and where we work. The vibe is different here. We are friendly, caring, hardworking, resilient, and resourceful. No one else covers Montana or cares for Montana more than Stockman Bank. To us, Montana isn't just a place. It's the only place we do business. That's why we are Montana's brand of banking.
I'm going to shift this conversation now to that risk management piece. Like you talked about, you love to help people early on with retirement because if you can invest it early, it's the 8th wonder of the world, compound interest. It went into my brain here. So, but there are situations where things haven't been planned out and life expenses, I mentioned the health emergency, stage 4 cancer within our family. Man, you can think you have savings until you face something like that and you realize you don't have a lot of savings. And so let's talk about some risk management as we look at the aging demographic of agriculture, long-term care, any other type of advice that you might have for that generation that's now facing some realities and realizing they didn't quite have their stuff as buttoned up as it could have been.
Yeah, it's you go back 60, 70 years and I think mom and dad ended up taking care of grandma and grandpa, and they didn't go to a assisted living facility or home health care or a nursing home because mom and dad did that. It might have been to the demise of mom and dad's marriage because they spent every waking minute either running the business or taking care of grandma and grandpa. And so that was also in a day when all family lived very close. Well, we're in a day and age where, a family might have 4 kids and 3 of them are out of state and only one of them's in state. So who's going to take care of mom and dad or grandma and grandpa when that comes? And it's a real risk. It's a fly in the ointment for a lot of these operations, especially operations that have significant assets. And the most significant asset on every operation is the real estate. And now recently the cattle. I mean, the value of cattle right now. And it is a very time-sucking and money-sucking event if you were to need care because you have to hire it out and pay for somebody else to do it. And in rural Montana, or rural America for that matter, it's very difficult. Home health care is virtually non-existent unless you're in a bigger city. So you're looking at some sort of facility care, which is either assisted living or a nursing home. Highline, Havre, Montana, you're probably $10,000 a month for a nursing home. Billings, you're probably 8 to 9,000. I mean, it's a lot of money. So you take a look at that, and you take a look at 2 years of that, and what that can do to the liquidity of your operation. Can the operation sustain that bill, which is essentially what it is? And if you haven't done your planning for that, because there's really only a couple ways to plan for that. Either you pass that risk off to an insurance company, and if you're 65 or older, that's going to be tough. That premium is going to be pretty stiff if you can get approved for it. But beyond that, it's going to have to be about, how do you stuff cash away somewhere else that can grow, that can take care of you. I mean, there's other areas you can do from an elder law planning standpoint, which an attorney can help with. But a lot of that type of planning does take choice away, choice of care and choice of where you want to be, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, again, the best medicine for that is preventative maintenance and making a plan for that. If you're late to the ball game, your choices are slim, but why not with these great cattle prices right now, especially on the livestock side? Farm side, I know it's a little bit more difficult, especially if you're on the wheat farming side, but why not take some of that cash and put it somewhere else if you're late to the game for long-term care planning, and at least have a plan to peel off some dollars every year in case that were to happen. And if it doesn't, that's okay. I mean, that cash can go somewhere else, but long-term care planning is the toughest to plan for because we don't know if we're going to need it. And if we do need it, we don't know how long it's going to be for. And so, some of my advice is talk to somebody, talk to an advisor, talk to somebody who's versed in long-term care and what the options are for you at your stage in life. If you're late to the game, might not be a lot, but some plan is better than no plan, I will say.
So 2 follow-ups with that, Ty. Number one, I know probably I was in my early 20s, so probably 20 years ago now, long-term care insurance was all the rage. We'd go to these agricultural conferences and everybody be trying to sell long-term care insurance. I haven't really heard much about it as of late, so I know it still exists, but it seems like the marketing push has pulled back.
Yeah, it's still there. I think, a long time ago, it was traditional insurance, which was just like your crop insurance, just like your farm and ranch policy, just like your LRP contract. All it was a premium. And if something bad didn't happen, you never used it. But that's insurance. It's an I word. We don't like I words in agriculture, but I really don't want to have a bad thing happen either to where I have to use that insurance, right? There are other alternatives out there now to where you can have a life insurance policy that can double as a long-term care insurance policy. Essentially, what that means is if you have a death benefit, somebody's going to get that death benefit. Either you are going to use it for long-term care, or if you don't need it, it's going to get passed on to your heirs or whomever you choose. So there's a lot more risk management products out there, Haylie, that a guy or a gal can look at from that standpoint. But they require a premium, and the longer you wait, the more premium it's going to cost because of the insane cost of facility care right now. And back to facility care, it takes a special person to work in a facility like that where you're dealing with death on pretty near a daily basis. And so you have to compensate those employees, and that's why the cost of care continues to go up, just like everything is from an inflation standpoint. So there are still options for risk management, but it is definitely different than what it was 25 years ago.
And those long-term care facilities, I've done some work with ours locally, and they're all at risk of closing right now because
Yes.
what they're compensated for care is typically not close to what that actually takes to deliver that. So, yeah, constantly changing. The next follow-up question with that, you said, when these cattle markets are high, this is a great time to peel off some of that money, set that aside for if and when this happens. So you do have, I don't want to say liquid capital. So you do have, you have an asset there that you can grab fairly easily. So I know you don't want this just sitting in a checking account, but you also have to have it decently liquid. So what would be your recommendation for somebody that is, the average age of the farmer 60s to 70s, and they need to have some cash to set aside for something like this, but they're not going to be sticking it away for 40 years.
Yeah, I think it's a different vehicle as far as where that cash is stashed. The engine of the vehicle could be a lot of different things, and that's really very personalized for that individual on where to go. Again, it's tough because we don't know when that time might come where they will need it. I mean, if they're 60 years old and they're not going to need it till 85, that's a pretty good timeline to be able to get some growth and use some assets to do that. I'm not going to specifically say what they should do because it's very specific based on the individual. But I will say there's lots of different options out there between owning companies, between different types of fixed income investments to provide yield and to potentially provide more growth than just keeping it in a checking account. Nothing against banks and all that, but when we're dealing against this monster called inflation, it's running way hotter than what we can get in the bank. So we have to find alternatives to get our money to grow at least at the pace of inflation. Because if we don't, we're falling behind and we're forced to live on less or provide less care at that point.
All right. Well, I've got two just kind of wild card questions before we close our discussion today. And one is going to go back to, I'll do the Social Security one first, because this one's more linked to retirement. For a lot of folks, our generation, I think we're darn close to the same age. I was a child of the 80s, complete farm recession, depression, whatever you call it. People were not paying themselves, and agriculture has always been afraid of showing income because they would have to pay taxes on it. And so folks have, just drilled down that end of year number for so long. And you don't have to talk to too many people over coffee in a small town before everybody tells you that's a strategy that they have done. So in that, they haven't been paying into Social Security. When it does come time to actually start pulling off of that, they're almost shocked that their payments are $800 a month, but the reality is that they didn't invest that much into it. So how does Social Security work? Is it I've heard it's the best 3 years that you've had. I've heard different things. I don't know how it works. And then is it going to stick around is the next question that everybody asks.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Social Security, the calculation is the average of your best 35 earning years. That's called the PIA, or the primary insurance amount, is what that is, because Social Security is a pension. It's an annuity is what it is. I could go into other things that it is, but that's essentially what it is. A lot of farmers have, if they don't have positive net income as a sole proprietor, they never pay into the system. And I would argue the more important component of the Social Security system is Medicare, because if you don't have enough work credits in the Medicare system, you are going to have to pay for Part A, which is your hospital insurance with Medicare. Everybody else who has enough work credits, they get Part A for free. And Part A is not cheap. So I would argue you have to pay enough, or you have to show enough income to have Medicare once you turn 65. So you are not paying out of pocket for Part A. As far as Social Security, going back to that and what that looks like, I mean, quite honestly, there's way better investments that you can make if you take a look at how much you've put into Social Security versus how much you're going to get out of it over a 35-year time frame. I mean, it's part of our legal system. It's part of what has to be done. But I think the Medicare component is the bigger component of that. Your second question, Haylie, regarding Social Security,
Yeah, and
what was
then
that again?
nope, that's I think it for the Social Security. Just kind of the how does it work, and then if it was going to go away. That
Yeah.
seems to be such a talking head. Whoever you're listening to on the news, that's always seems to be a threat.
Well, if I had the answer to that, I'd be everybody's favorite, wouldn't I? It's a pension that's blowing up. If you go back 30 years ago, for every one person who was pulling from Social Security, there were 5 workers that were putting into Social Security. Today, for every one person that's pulling from it, there's only 2 people that are putting into it. And so, the primary reason why a lot of these corporate companies don't have pensions anymore is because of that, is because of that less workforce and retiring of the baby boomer generation and so on and so forth. So if Congress doesn't act, by the year 2031, I think it is 5 years from now, people are going to be staring at a significant cut to their Social Security check. I believe that's probably political suicide for both sides not to get that done. But at the same time, for every day they wait, it becomes harder to shore up that system. And so I think it's going to get done, but there's definitely some roadblocks in getting there. Social Security was never designed to be your sole income later in life. It was always designed to be a supplement. So you have to have other income sources if you want to have flexibility later in life.
And you don't need to know this one off the top of your head, but wasn't Social Security built when like the average age of survival was like 75 or something like that? Like people were never intended to live 30 years on Social Security.
That's part of the reason it's blowing up, and our life expectancy, just because of the advancements in medicine, have continued to increase, and that is definitely a factor.
All right, now we're going to completely shift this around, and I'm going back to what we do for our kids. So one really common thing in agriculture, in ranching, is that you are going to get your child a brand, and you're going to, brand a couple of calves a year, and then you maybe let them have a 15 head herd that they run alongside you, and then you make the option of, are we keeping a heifer or are we going to sell a steer? Do you have any recommendations for how that works in this entire financial picture? I know it's pretty common to sell the steer, throw it into a bank account under the parent's name, and then that's your college fund. But I'm thinking there's probably a smarter way of investing it that could yield more returns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really depends on what your goals are with your child. I mean, if it's to pay for college, if you want them to go to college, then that could be one avenue where you could put it. If you want them to have a head start on retirement, that could be another avenue to put it. It also could be just an avenue of where you put dollars away for them and they use it to start their own business, or they use it as a down payment on a house. So really it depends on what the goals are of the parents, what they want that to be done for. I certainly wouldn't just leave it in the bank. I mean, the child is always going to need some spending money to buy that next 4-H steer or 4-H pig or lamb or whatever it is. But especially when there's a long timeline of when they might be using it, there's a lot more options, especially in my world, to provide better growth, albeit there's going to be volatility with any investment. But over long periods of time, there's definitely more opportunity for growth.
Right. Ty, we have covered so much, and I know everybody's brains are going to be whirling, and hopefully they'll be looking at your website and maybe blowing you up for some questions too. But any last thoughts that you have before we close this out today?
Yeah, I would say this is not easy, talking about transition planning and all that. I find that a lot of us are more capable and find it easier to talk to our cows than we do to talk to one another, especially family members in situations like this. Every family has a dynamic. Just remember that. So you are not the only ones having a dynamic. But I will say having transparency, making a plan now. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't let perfect become the enemy of good enough. Remember that as well. But at least getting a start so you can provide clarity for all the stakeholders, I think is really what it comes down to. And don't wait until the nth hour to do it. Start now. Let's figure out what the main goal is, knock out one or two of them, gain that momentum, because this is not something that happens overnight. This is a journey. It takes some time, but it's all about having good wins, quick wins along the way until we finally have a good plan in place. And then we don't just stick it on the shelf, Haylie. We got to keep looking at it because things are going to change. Assets are going to go up and down. And so we just have to get into the habit and get into the rhythm of continuing to look at it as part of our business planning.
Thank you, thank you, thank you to Ty McDonald. I couldn't have imagined that podcast recording going any better. What tremendous insight. Now, if today's discussion sparked some questions about retirement planning, paying family members, or simply where to get started with these conversations, I have included all of Ty's contact information in the show notes. His website, his LinkedIn, his Facebook page. And I am especially going to point you towards the blog section of his website. Ty and his team have built out a tremendous library of articles and resources that dig deeper into many of the topics that we touched on today. As always, thank you for listening to the Ranch Stewards Podcast, and thank you for supporting this project over the past 3 seasons. Until next time, take care.
You've been listening to the Ranch Stewards Podcast, a project of the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. If you like what you heard, head to ranchstewards.org for added content, or follow the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance on Facebook and Instagram.